I was just having a conversation with some of my fellow duelists here. We were just talking about YuGiOh. Ever heard of it? Hi guys, this is our first Subjectively Speaking with 3 subjectivists. I know in the past it's been just me, but we are all very involved in the artistic world of YuGiOh.
The world of duel monsters.
The world of duel monsters.
The artistic world of YuGiOh doesn't exist.
It actually doesn't.
So, YuGiOh. For once, subjectivists, we're going to dive into YuGiOh and finally explain the game in a way that isn't incredibly obscure, isolating references sprinkled throughout our other videos. Sorry about that. Today, we're going to be talking about a part of the game that's almost as baffling as our constant no-context jokes and references. The art direction. As always, what we're going to be talking about today is subjective. That is, it's just our opinion. Let me know in the comments if you agree, disagree, or even have theories of your own, and let's start a discussion. While you're at it, don't forget to like and subscribe, that really helps us out a lot. Also, check out our newest sponsor, Inked Gaming, which produces high-quality gaming gear, such as playmats, card sleeves, mouse pads, and more. Now, without further ado, let's get down to business. Today, we'll be discussing our ideas on why the art direction in YuGiOh actually makes perfect sense, more or less. YuGiOh is a card game based off the animated series of the same name, which was itself based on a manga written and illustrated by Kazuki Takahashi for Shonen Jump. Before YuGiOh was about duel monsters, it actually read a lot more like a slice-of-life style manga, but with a dark twist. The story follows Yugimoto, a shy, often bullied schoolboy with a passion for puzzles and games. After years of tinkering, he eventually solves the Millennium Puzzle, an Egyptian relic recovered by his grandfather during his days as an archaeologist. Upon solving the puzzle, the dark spirit of a pharaoh, the king of games, inhabits Yugi's body and takes root as an alter ego that emerges whenever Yugi finds himself in dangerous or challenging situations. When the pharaoh, or Yami, emerges, he forces antagonists into various shadow games, often with life or death stakes. Eventually, the story shifts its focus to a trading card game, Duel Monsters, which becomes the primary plot device. Yami and Yugi begin to work together, with Yami helping Yugi develop confidence and strategize, while Yugi teaches him about friendship and promises to help him recall his past. YuGiOh becomes much more like your typical shonen anime. Its main themes are ones of conflict and resolution, believing in yourself and your friends, and, perhaps most importantly, believing in the heart of the cards. Eventually, a real-life card game was developed by Konami, featuring many of the cards from the anime, but adding more rules to make the game playable. Much of the early real-life card art was directly adapted from the anime and manga, but over time, as more and more artists became involved and the card game grew, things started to get a little out of hand. What had started out with a straightforward traditional fantasy art direction, loosely taking inspiration from existing games like Dungeons & Dragons and Magic the Gathering, snowballed into an anything-goes eclectic collection of card art with various card families or archetypes, taking inspiration from everything from token-esque high fantasy to sci-fi Gundams, historical mythologies, and everything in between. And for the purpose of the card game, that's totally fine. In any card game, the art direction, while obviously an important hook, is still secondary to the actual mechanics of the game. At the end of the day, the artwork does not actually impact how the game is played. However, it's still important to establishing the tone of a game. Let's look again at Magic the Gathering. Now, forgive me if I'm oversimplifying Magic. I am not a Magic player, and most of my knowledge of the game comes from friends who play. Magic the Gathering was the very first trading card game. It was released in 1993 by Wizards of the Coast, and was largely inspired by traditional role-playing games such as D&D. Each game of Magic represents a structured battle between powerful wizards, or planeswalkers, mustering the other of their life points by using resource cards to cast spells, summon minions, or gain allied units. Magic the Gathering, unlike YuGiOh, has a very specific art direction and setting, which makes sense for a more structured card game with a much stronger role-playing component. Card art in Magic is generally realistic, and especially in the game's infancy, drew heavily from established high fantasy conventions popularized by Tolkien. YuGiOh, in contrast, is not a role-playing game. You, the player, are the most important part of the game. Basically, it really does come down to the heart of the cards, as cheesy as that sounds. Different decks in YuGiOh can play drastically different from each other, depending on how you combine cards and design your combos. There are so many different playstyles, and decks are ultra customizable, which is something that personally drew me to YuGiOh in the first place. Well, that and a certain amount of nostalgia value. But my point is this. Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks and playstyles are often so personalized that I feel each player's deck is actually reflective of the person playing it, at least in some small way. Of course, you could argue that, at the super meta competitive level, decks are just about winning, but isn't someone's drive to have the most efficient, as likely to win as possible deck a little revealing too? That's just my 2 cents.
What kind of monsters do you like is the first question to ask yourself when building a deck. But what even constitutes a monster? From a gameplay standpoint, a monster is a card that can be summoned to a monster zone to do battle or activate its unique effects. But from a design perspective, what really is a monster? Well, in Yu-Gi-Oh, it is anything. And that's the approach the designers take to every aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh! A monster can be whatever you want, and each unique archetype of monster has an equally unique playstyle to accompany it. Do monsters have horns? And do trolls have big noses?
I like that part.
Do aliens look like blue humans? In Yu-Gi-Oh, there are no rules. Okay, well, no rules within the art direction. There are a lot of rules. Lol. All joking aside, the point is that when someone is designing around a vague description like monster, they can do whatever they want. Even so, there are some loose categories Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters are more or less contained within. Monsters are broken down into about 24 types, and for those in the audience who are not Dueling Legends, or if you only played Yu-Gi-Oh! When you were like 7, we can run through those real quick. Fiend, Spellcaster, Plant, Machine, Warrior, Beast, Beast Warrior, Rock, Winged Beast, Fish, Reptile, Psychic, Thunder, Aqua, Zombie, Worm, Fairy, Pyro, Dragon, Insect, Sea Serpent, and the newest type, Cybers. These types generally indicate loose guidelines for gameplay and in art direction. For example, a lot of Psychic monsters have reoccurring motifs, like green electricity in their artwork, and often play heavily into synchro-based strategies. Psychic archetypes like the Psyframes, especially the Psyframe Lord Omega, and Psychic Wielder exemplify this really well. Usually, these visual clues can tell a player what kind of deck and strategy a card might belong in, but sometimes the card artist, confusingly, go against every grain, even within these very loose rules. Something that is clearly a dragon could actually be a warrior, and something that screams machine could be a fairy. Vague words like monster and machine have endless possibilities. Sometimes a card being a certain type has very little to do with the art on the card, but relates more to something to do gameplay-wise. After all, card art is still secondary to the flow of a duel and the balanced gameplay. Maybe a small, struggling type needs some interesting new support, and they have to bend the previous conventions of that archetype or monster type to fit the needs of the players in the current meta. But overall, Yu-Gi-Oh! Really shows that you don't have to be confined to these pre-existing design tropes or stereotypes. Another way to categorize monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is through their attributes. Card attributes add another level of customization to decks and opportunities to synergize with strategies. The attributes in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are Fire, Water, Wind, Earth, Dark, Light, and Divine, which is so crazy.
That's funny.
And then the fan-made laugh type. Most of these line up as you would expect. Fish monsters are usually water. Rock types are usually earth, and so on. But what is even more important than that is the connotations of the more abstract attributes, dark and light. Ever since the first caveman discovered fire, and we realized that Endermen wander around in the night. Light has been good, and dark has been bad. We culturally have kind of stuck to this rule, and many character designers have incorporated this basic concept into their art. It's why bad guys usually wear black. However, in Yu-Gi-Oh!, things are a little different. Because most of the early monsters were inspired by demons, yokai, and supernatural creatures that had a darker, more hellish, and even sometimes horrific aesthetic, Yu-Gi-Oh! Diverges from established good and evil tropes, especially in the anime. I mean, the amount of occult imagery going on with Yami and Yugi's first deck is enough to tell that things are going to be a little screwy. In fact, Yugi's deck mostly contained dark monsters for the entire first anime. I mean, Yugi's first ace monster was Summon Skull, a dark fiend-type monster. If the hero was winning his duels with a ripped, veiny skeleton and waxing on about friendship, it really puts in perspective that dark isn't necessarily bad, but maybe just misunderstood. This all really goes against Western ideas of good and evil. Yu-Gi-Oh! Takes the subversion even further and makes many of the anime bad guys monsters light attribute. The most classic example is Seto Kaiba's ace monster, Blue Eyes White Dragon. Let's compare Blue Eyes to another iconic Yu-Gi-Oh! Dragon, Red Eyes Black Dragon, one of Joey's main monsters and originally wielded by Yugi in the manga. Let's look at the two monsters visually. Blue Eyes is a light blue, almost white, and has a rounder head and softer body than Red Eyes. Red Eyes, by contrast, is black, sharp, and just like the name says, has blood jam red eyes. Imagine if you'd never seen Yu-Gi-Oh! Before. Who do you think the good guy's dragon is? Your assumptions are all based on design tropes you've seen over and over, over and over, over and over. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Subverts them. So these two dragons might represent two different ideals. Blue Eyes represents power and elitism, and Red Eyes represents potential, and shows that through all the powerful fusions it can undergo.
While these design decisions may seem unexpected, it actually reinforces Yu-Gi-Oh!'s main themes of individualism and personal strategy. There's a lot of subtext that can be interpreted from character design in Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! And a lot of it will go completely unappreciated by the players. But that's okay. Like we said before, the level of involvement with the game depends entirely on the unique players, what it is that they want out of it. Some people are all about the mechanics of the game, and the art direction is secondary. But for people like us, the deciding factor when it comes to building a deck is often the design of the monsters and finding a playstyle that fits with the theme of those cards. And the incredibly diverse range of card art within Yu-Gi-Oh! Supports that. Do you want a whirlwind of crows to swarm your opponent with? Sure. Want to excavate your deck to unearth mighty dinosaur monsters? Why not? You can even follow a hamburger recipe to ritualistically summon the fearsome hungry burger.
That's so stupid.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Has an absurdly large catalog of cards, and each archetype of cards has a unique art direction to complement its unique style of play. But somehow there is still a common thread across the breadth of nearly all Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters, and it comes down to, once more, the human element. As we've established, creating a deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is all about personalization. And shockingly, there's a reoccurring theme among many Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetypes that actually reflects this emphasis on personalization and the player. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, decks usually contain many smaller, weaker monsters whose various effects can be used along with supporting spells and traps to get larger, more powerful deck bosses out. These monsters can be pretty much anything. Plants, animals, little guys, whatever you want. But as the monsters become more powerful, a trend emerges. The strongest monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are surprisingly human? In fact, nearly all of the most powerful monsters in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game start to show human-like traits. Even the dragons, which are a staple of nearly every anime series and iteration of the TCG, are posed upright and often have human-like torsos or proportions.
In my own deck, based on the Blackwing archetype, my weaker monsters are pretty much just birds, but as my monsters grow in power, their designs become increasingly human or just outright become people in bird armor.
In my dragon deck, the smaller, more bestial monsters are more or less a means to an end. The end being large, upright dragons with defined chests, arms, human hands, and oftentimes excessive muscles.
Even in my epic magnet deck, the legendary boss monster Berserkion is very humanoid and resembles an anime-inspired Gundam mech.
Though sometimes subtle, I personally see a very humanist trend throughout many archetypes. So, what does it mean that the strongest monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Show human-like qualities? Well, once again, it emphasizes the value of the human element. The mightiest forces within Yu-Gi-Oh! Show their power by demonstrating their human-like qualities, and it mirrors the structure of the game as a whole. You, the duelist, are the most important asset of your deck. The duelist's ability to strategize and build a personalized deck that supports their strategy is the most important aspect of the game to understand and master. Is Yu-Gi-Oh!'s art direction crazy? Sometimes even confusing? Sure. But it also serves its intended purpose very well. More than anything else, the art direction in Yu-Gi-Oh! Supports the game's ability to offer a personalized experience, which is one of the things that we all like best about the game. The diverse range of styles offer tons of options and caters to every kind of taste and allows players to find a deck that personally resonates with them. After all, you can't win if you don't believe in the heart of the cards. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed our first three-way subjectively speaking.
That's so stupid. That's such a stupid joke.
Let us know in the comments what you guys think. Give us your opinion on Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters. If you are completely new to Yu-Gi-Oh! Or if you're only familiar with it from what you remember as a kid, chime in. What do you think of the monsters that we've shown you in this video? Does it seem intimidating? Because if you had talked to me even 2 years ago, I would have never wanted to get into Yu-Gi-Oh! Just because I look at like the monsters on the booster packs and it immediately it over-stimulates me so quickly. But let us know if you are a Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan. Please chime in. Let us know what kind of decks you use, if the art direction is important to you, if you feel like what we're saying makes sense. Please. Also, don't forget to check out our Patreon. We have some awesome behind-the-scenes content available for patrons, and we post polls to vote on new video ideas and more.
Duel me.
Wait, duel me. Meet me in the Nexus, duelingnexus.com. We're sponsored by duelingnexus.com.
They need it. Jesus Christ.
They do.
Go out of business every day.
Every week.
They need help, guys. Help Dueling Nexus out.
It will shut down.
They will shut down. And if you want to duel completely free on your iMac.
Alright guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you next week.